Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest session of the Wildlife Summit, as the second part of VegFest UK Online, November 14th, 15th, 2020, hosted on the vegfest.co.uk website, where you'll find all our materials, all our presentations, all our live streams from what has proved to be a very interesting summit so far today. Some excellent interviews, presentations, but none more so than what's coming up now. We have an hour or so in the company, the esteemed company, I should say, of not only our good colleague and friend Jade Emery from Animal Aid, who will be asking some questions, but also our principal guest, Peter Egan. So without any further ado, we shall bring in both Jade and Peter and say good afternoon to both of you. And thank you very much for joining us. Jade, thank you very much for organising this one. And Peter, thank you for joining us today from what appears to be probably your front room, I would assume, at home somewhere.
It's kitchen at home in Surrey, yeah. And thank you very much, Tim. It's great to be here, and Jade, it's lovely to see you. I'm a huge fan, as you know, of VegFest. And the sad thing about today is that we can't all be together in person, because the events that I've been to, 3 or 4 of them now over the years, have all been sensational. And one thing in particular I'm going to miss by today is not being in that wonderful food hall with so many magnificent young entrepreneurs bringing the most sensational food to us. I mean, it's just fantastic. I always come away having eaten too much.
It is the thing that dreams are made of, isn't it? Like, remember last year I had some deep fried cookie dough with salted caramel ice cream, and it was fantastic.
Wonderful,
yes,
wonderful.
Hopefully we'll be able to do that again soon.
The vegan sushi that I miss, I would have had one of those wonderful wraps today, and just as an amazing array. What was fantastic about it is that people who don't understand how delicious and exciting and varied vegan food is, I just want to take them by the hand and plant them in the middle of that food hall and say, have a look at this. It is sensational. So I miss that today.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, yes. A poignant moment. And I know that a lot of us are missing, a lot this year. It's a sad year, and it's going to take a while to rectify. I think probably by this time next year, I think we may well see the world in many respects back to normal for a lot of us, but there'll be many of us left behind who will carry the scars and bear the memories and what's happened for a long time to come.
But I hope that back to normal doesn't mean going back to the status quo, where the world accepts the fact that they can treat animals in the way they do, because so many people are saying today that this is an animal disease, COVID, and although it is a zoonotic disease, it is created by humans. It's not created by animals. It's created by the intensive, aggressive farming of wildlife in wet farms like Wuhan and all over Southeast Asia. It's absolutely horrible. I visited 2 farms like this in Indonesia a year and a half ago, and they were the most shocking experiences of my entire life. I'll never forget it. And the way that these poor creatures were crammed together like sardines and were brutally killed, and you walk through a marketplace that is spewing intestines and blood and disease. And that's that's my dog Tipper in the background, I'm afraid, who is very attention jealous, and so this may be happening a bit. No, be quiet. But can you hang on 1 second? 1 second. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Come here. Tipper's down here, desperately wanting attention. I'll show her to you if you like.
Yes, no, please do.
Can you see her there?
Oh.
There you go. That's Tipper. She's a staffy, one of my 5. She's a staffy cross rescue, and she likes having lots of attention. No, right. Can you give her a little treat? Excuse me 1 second. Won't be a sec.
Yes.
Stop that.
It's been one of the most, I guess, entertaining aspects of this kind of new way of like meeting everyone virtually is meeting everyone's dogs, and lots of meetings at work or video calls are interrupted by these dogs who want to join in and want the attention. It's
well, this may happen because I got 5 of them, so I hope. Sorry, just to finish what I was saying about that. Going back to normal, Tim, I hope the normal embraces the fact that the human race has got to change its attitude to animals and animal rights and the rights for all animals on our planet to have what we have and what we want to look forward to is a peaceful life free from aggression, coercion, and imposed slaughter. And that may be a bit wishful, but that's what I'm hoping for, is that more people focus on that.
Well, certainly, we this is part of the point of having summits like this, and the fact is, and although you mentioned, of course, about all the good food that you used to have at VegFest, in many respects, it was the summits and the debates, and the VegFest always had sort of a dual function there, really. One was to introduce people and to share all of this wonderful culture, and to help support the growth of many, many different facets of plant-based diets and veganism. But then there was always, the summits and the focus of the experts, the talks, the education, the inspiration, and helping shape the movement and allow the movement to have a good space, a broad tent to discuss safely a number of progressive, quite radical aspects of veganism and plant-based diets, a lot of which we now take a little bit for granted, Just going back though, Pete, the very first time, I know you wanted to mention this, so at the very first time that you came to VegFest, there's an interesting story actually. I've dined out on it a few times. It's of course my good friend Karen Richards, who quietly invited you along and hadn't told me, and I remember turning up in a bit of a flap halfway through the event on the Saturday, and it's Karen. We were co-hosting the awards, and our main co-host, our main presenter, hadn't turned up, and I had to call off literally that morning. And I was a bit in a flap about it, as you do. And I remember saying to Karen, what are we going to do? And you were stood there, and you go, oh, well, I can do that. I was like, oh, fantastic, marvelous. So up you stepped at about half hour's notice to impeccably deliver our awards ceremony. And of course, that was a very poignant moment, because it was at that moment that we had an award for Andrew Tyler, who was the previous director of Animal Aid for a long time. 17, 18 years or something, I believe. He was with Animal Aid, and very fondly remembered. Andrew's no longer with us. He died a few years ago. But that was the occasion then, and I remember well that occasion. Where we gave that lifetime award for Andrew, and you presented. Andrew was unable to come up; he wasn't well enough to come and collect it. And Fiona come and collect it on his behalf.
It was a much-deserved award, I think, because it's interesting, because I have quite a convoluted attachment with Animal Aid, which is a charity that I admire hugely, and I'm delighted to be a patron for. And a very good friend of mine, Andre Manaf, who used to work for Animal Aid, we were trustees of a charity, All Dogs Matter, in North London, about 11 years ago. I still am, but he's not. He's now in Paris. But it was Andre who introduced me to really understanding how vivisection is so appalling, and how hard it is to tackle and achieve anything that you can in the anti-vivisection movement. And he was having lots of debates and arguments, at the universities about it. And but interestingly enough, that introduced me to a woman called Louise Owen, who runs a charity called For Life on Earth. And she introduced me to a brilliant scientist in America. His name is Dr. Ray Greig. And that takes me back to Andrew Tyler, because in the year 2000, there was a debate about starting a non-human primate laboratory on Greenbelt land. Cambridge University was fighting for this. And it was Andrew Tyler who realized that the best person, in fact, to put the argument against this would be Dr. Ray Greig. So he brought him over, and it was after his 5-hour oral witness testimony and the submission of detailed proof of evidence that the government inspector ruled against the Cambridge Climate Laboratory with a precedent decision on national interest, medical and scientific grounds. So it was a fantastic achievement at the time, and it was because of Andrew Tyler bringing over this brilliant scientist, Dr. Ray Greig, who is the scientist who advises for Life on Earth, for whom I'm also a patron. And he was a brilliant man. Most of the vivisectionists won't debate with him because he wipes the floor with them. But it's a very, very, very opposite now, because I think the information is coming through more and more and more just how much of a failure animal testing is for human diseases. It's an over 90% failure rate. And a lot of this evidence is produced by Dr. Ray Greig and, of course, initiated by Animal Aid. So I pay great tribute to both of them in this conversation now.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. That's.
Sorry, did I stop that rather abruptly?
No, I was just pausing because, Andrew's such a loved person still with Animal Aid.
Yeah.
Today, and indeed another gentleman, John Bryan, who passed away not long ago. I think this year, actually. John's a big advocate. I know he would have been thrilled by the Wildlife Summit and the attention that we're able to give this. And it gives me a moment to mention actually how much, I know that it's only last week that we remember Barry Horn, who died 19 years ago.
Yeah.
He died a hunger strike, for the vivisection issue. He died, pretty much gave his life for the cause. And these people remind me of the, we're standing on the shoulders of giants is a phrase that we use often with this. To Professor Tom Regan, who died 3 years ago, who laid the ground in many respects for the whole argument for animal rights, and especially with vivisection in mind. And of course now, vivisection very much in the mind, with vaccines, and even just today, the announcement of the Labour Party are trying to, make sure there's no talk. Indeed, it's illegal to talk about any kind of anti-vax message, and that's very close to shutting down a conversation about vivisection.
Yes.
Of course, it's a bigger issue there, and I wouldn't want to get into all of that, particularly right now. But this issue of vivisection, it's a very emotive one. It's been a very difficult one to bring through. And although we're not strictly talking about wildlife here, nevertheless, I think it just gives an opportunity to say, how much I respect the people like Andrew, like Tom Regan, like John Bryan, who've really done so much to laying the foundations for what I share with you, your vision of the new norm would actually be, a world where we're eating plant-based diets, where we recognise that one right of animals not to be used as property in the same way as we recognise that for humans have a right not to be used as property, and to see this whole philosophical concept, really, this position, this principle, this justice position come through, as well, of course, as this huge growth in plant-based diets and all the benefits associated with this, especially from an environmental perspective and a sustainable food perspective.
Well, I think we'd all agree that if the world were vegan, we wouldn't have any form of vivisection anyway. And you're quite right to say that it is a hugely, hugely complicated subject. That's why, if I could just say for any of your people who are listening, any of our viewers who are listening or interested, I fight very, very much with this group for Life on Earth, and we are pushing for an EBM 250, which asks for a peer-reviewed debate on the highest scientific level, and it will be led by Dr. Ray Greig. And if we ever achieve that, I think that will bring an end to the vivisection. Also, there is a great move. There are so many scientists now who are privately saying it doesn't work. And hopefully we will get there at some time.
I think just before we move on, and I know Jade, you've got some questions sort of more specifically related to wildlife and also Peter's background, but I have noted, of course, that a lot of the current COVID-19 vaccine testing has been done on humans, not animals. So a lot of us skipped the animal stage, which is something I hadn't actually considered really, the speed at which these are moving. You know, it seems to be humans that have been trialled. The animals have been,
well, it's much more successful for humans because you have to test cures for human diseases on humans and not on animals. We have entirely different systems. We're complex individuals and we have entirely different systems. It's a total waste of time and money, and it's got to stop. So Jade, sorry.
Jade.
Oh no, of course, no. It's fascinating, and it's such an important thing to talk about.
It is also interesting enough, as we touched on a second ago. Sorry to interrupt you, Jade. It's a very interesting kind of series of definitions. We all live in a world now where people are constantly bringing up reference to animal welfare, and in many cases are very frightened of the term animal rights, because they see animal rights people as being either balaclava and aggressive, sort of lunatic kind of people, whereas in fact, all of the animal rights people I know are the most human, compassionate, and intelligent people on the planet. But this term animal welfare is like a kind of smokescreen to lead people away from the clear door that is marked animal rights, because you can't have welfare. You can't have human welfare without human rights. And I believe you can't have animal welfare without animal rights. And that, again, is one of the reasons why I'm so proud to support Animal Aid, because you are an animal rights charity, and so you should be.
Thanks for mentioning that, actually, Peter. We've got an Animal Rights Summit next month, indeed, as our next focus is going to be in animal rights, because it is a much misunderstood issue, in part because I think of the media representation of animal rights, especially in the 80s and 90s. Although there is a counter argument to say that some of the activities of the animal rights movement did play into the hands of the media as such, and I think there's certainly lessons to be learned from that era. And we do indeed have one or two people on our conversation later on today who from that era, the 80s and 90s activism, and more recently too. But we will be looking at that. It's very important to understand the animal rights issue and how animal rights underpins veganism and the vegan lifestyle choices. And there are some great, there's the Animal Rights Show, which is pretty much every week. There's some great, as it were, middle ground, sort of informative, supportive, educative, friendly, non-hostile, non-judgmental, non-aggressive.
Yes, that's wonderful to hear. Yeah,
that are absolutely essential to understanding these issues.
I think that people use the term animal welfare as an escape route to get away from the central problem, which is that you mustn't slaughter, be cruel, or take the life of animals. And animal welfare is always a kind of cushion which actually leads the public to believe that if an animal, say for instance, if an animal has a good life on a farm, it doesn't mind being slaughtered, which is absolute rubbish. So all I mean in terms of, without wishing to kind of confuse the issue, I think that animal welfare is a kind of soft piece of massaging towards the acceptance of cruelty. If that makes sense at all.
Right, yeah, it is undoubtedly the kind of humane thing. The meat marketing and the animal product marketing boards come up with a number of terms and phrases and campaigns to try and make us feel comfortable about exploiting animals because of the way we treat them. And so this language around cruelty and loving animals, we with the Veg Festival, sort of trying to always direct people to it's not really about cruelty and treatment. It's about the use of animals and whether they should be used at all. And when you have a discussion with a farmer who's going on about how much they love their animals and they've all got names for them and they love them and there's a contract where we look after them and then they, and
they're happy to give us their lives.
Yeah, basically. And when it comes down to it, you say, but the bottom line is this: it's not about the treatment of the animals or the welfare. It's about the use. And the fact you use them, you commodify, you breed,
exploit,
kill, profit. Now, there's no real argument to that except admitting to that and going, well, yeah, that's what I do. I breed animals, I kill them, I profit from them. And then I do it again, amongst a bunch of exploitation of animals.
It's similar.
To get that point clear, without, what I would say though at this point, and I slightly realise, Jade, I'm completely dominating this conversation.
No, this is absolutely fascinating. So please continue.
Yeah. What I would say, Peter, is that animal rights is a big stick. And, the concept of changing the way we look at animals so they are no longer property, but we understand them as persons, as individuals.
Sure.
That's a huge shift for people, and it's very challenging for people. And I think we have to be very, very careful in the way we present the animal rights argument. Not because there's anything wrong with the animal rights argument. It's the opposite. It's always right, actually, the animal rights argument. But because it's such a challenge to people, and therefore it requires a supportive, kind, educative, informative approach. And I think the confrontational, aggressive, demanding approach, although I fully recognise and respect the place it's had and continues to have, I think, I've learnt myself that animal rights in itself is a huge stick. It's got to be wielded with considerable caution and care and using the best communication understanding that we have.
Yeah, can I just say, I think the term a huge stick is a misrepresentative term because it looks like you're going to beat someone with something. Whereas in fact, you could say it's a huge carrot, because you're actually trying to lead people to a more compassionate and more caring, kind lifestyle. You don't need a big stick for that. You need a big heart and a big soul. And so I just choose to kind of take...
That's my point in a way. You've made the point that I say is that it's actually, as you rather well say, it's a huge carrot. It's to basically to dangle this and tempt people, but also to be clear and have an understanding of what animal rights really means.
Absolutely.
And not to be shy of explaining that, but to be also aware that for a lot of people this is, it's a big step having a plant-based meal. To consider animals as persons is a big step, and that's not to say we shouldn't present it or explain it. Of course we should. Otherwise, how else will the concept of animal rights be established? But we should recognise that it is quite a jar, and therefore to use this concept supportively in exactly the way you've just said, with big heart, with compassion, and with understanding.
It's interesting. I watched a lot this last week because we have this mink cull coming up in Denmark. 17 million minks are going to be destroyed or are being destroyed. And what was interesting, and this is in relation to this misconcept of animal welfare, there was this one mink farmer with tears in his eyes saying, I love these mink, it's horrible what I have to do to them. All he was doing was killing them earlier than he would normally do in terms, because, mink, you keep mink for their first year, they have their first winter when their coat is at its best, and then they get killed in the most appalling way. They gas them, so they fry from the inside. And here you have this mink farmer saying, I love these mink. It's absolute rubbish. He can't love something that he destroys. And this is the whole thing. And he says, I give them a good life. They're in a cage 2.5 foot wide, by 1 foot long or 1 foot high, and they live, these semi-aquatic, beautiful creatures, in this cage, and you have this person who thinks that he has an understanding of animal welfare, saying, I love them, I give them a good life. It's insane. So this whole journey, this whole process, and this goes right way back to the opening of this conversation, when this COVID is dealt with, that we don't go back to saying, I can eat animals because they are given good lives. We don't have to worry about that. I like to eat flesh. Don't take my meat away from me. Don't force me to do something that I have a right to do. And this whole argument is, you don't necessarily have a right to do that. It's the right that is imposed upon you by big corporate organizations who want to make money out of producing cheap meat. And it all gets lost in these kind of messages. And the term animal welfare aids that misconception, I think. That's why I think animal rights as a concept is so important, with a carrot and not a stick.
Absolutely, fully 100% subscribe to that. Thank you, Peter. That was very lucid, articulate, and no, it was. It's great that people are now talking this language, getting to grips with it, and if we don't do this, it's not going to come through. And I think the animal movement, broadly speaking, has shied away from the animal rights conversation, in part because of what happened, the history of the animal rights movement.
Yes.
There has been some confrontation and sort of there's been some different tactics that have been employed that have been controversial. Jade,
just let me finish by saying, I think animal rights is about love, not about aggression.
Absolutely.
It's about love and passion. And it is interpreted by people who don't like it as aggression, but it's not. It's about love.
well, we always point people to Professor Tom Regan. Tom Regan is a marvellous philosopher, very calmly spoken. There's a fantastic programme actually where he's on, I think, Irish TV. He's
RTV,
is it the Gay Byrne show or something like that? Yeah, something like that. And he's interviewed, and he is the most calm. He's got all the answers, and he gets some really interesting, challenging questions. And he's got the most beautiful tone and mannerism and answers. Are very eloquent. But I absolutely agree that So we do need to hear more of this, and this approach is fundamental to I think broadening the vegan movement beyond sort of dietary, lifestyle, and consumer choices.
Yes.
And of course, credit to Animal Aid. We mentioned this before. Animal Aid have maintained this, this flown this flag for a long time for different campaigns. Vivisection, wildlife, animals in captivity, and some of the areas that get cut. Some are traditionally now sort of missed off the agenda in some ways. So, very
absolutely. And just to kind of add to what you were saying, I think it's kind of important for us to almost attempt to reclaim the phrase animal rights. I mean, as you say, Tim, a lot of people did kind of move away from that because of negative associations, largely down to media and like negative publicity. But it's important to kind of be unapologetic and actually show the true face of animal rights and the movement, and that it is about love and compassion.
Yes, absolutely. Interesting. Where do you think that negative image came from, Joe? Where?
I think it was a last grasp of a dying industry that kind of recognized a very legitimate threat in the form of people waking up and seeing this exploitation and recognizing it for what it is. And I think it was a kind of final attempt to stop that. But look at what we've seen just in the past 5 years or so. Huge increase in the amount of people that have adapted a plant-based diet and the availability of that, and that's leading people more into the animal rights movement. So I think the industry absolutely recognizes that time's nearly up, and those negative stereotypes and that kind of demonization of the movement, that's where that comes from.
Yeah, good. I agree.
It's interesting times to live through, because when I went vegan, I went plant-based in 1980, and then vegan in 1984. But I was a vegan activist, so I was basically promoting plant-based diets through festivals. There's sort of festival and party scene, so it's all about sort of having parties and having good times and gatherings. But it was always plant-based, and so we're just basically introducing people to the idea of eating plant-based, as opposed to really the ethics of using animals. But I think part of the issue was back in the 80s, and perhaps the new generation of activists will perhaps need reminding of this. It's called, back in the 80s, we didn't even have mobile phones.
Yeah.
You just kind of have to queue up for a phone box in the middle of this state. And there'd only be one of them, and it'd probably be vandalized, and you'd be lucky to get your 10p in and chat to whoever it was. And so there was a whole more of a kind of underground aspect to campaigning. And of course, you can see now the Spike Ops inquiry going on now, of where undercover police have infiltrated, especially animal rights groups, going back, 50 years. And I think 30, 40 years ago, the culture was so different. You just didn't have social media. You didn't have the communications.
Yeah.
People worked underground. And, the media didn't report ever friendly on anything sensible that we were trying to do. And so really, if you wanted to make a noise about it, you really did have to do something pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
And I think the original animal rights campaigners had, some tactics that really did draw attention to the issues. One of the ones was, basically setting off the sprinklers in the fur departments in the big posh shops. So there were sort of small incendiaries that would go off that were never life-threatening or damage to humans, but would cause damage to property, and so sort of cause enough smoke to set off the sprinklers that then destroy sort of millions of pounds worth of fur coats and such like. Of course, the media did really jump on and blow up and misrepresent that kind of activity.
The media would always be dominated by corporate interest anyway.
It would be. It's certainly then, even more so, because we didn't have the free media and the free access that you have now.
Exactly, absolutely.
It was completely sewn up, as they say.
Also, Tim, to be perfectly frank, before I'm a late comer to all of this. I'm not from being much older than both of you, or probably the same age as your combined ages. It was when I used to hear, about the hunt sabs and animal rights and that kind of stuff. I was probably thinking, oh, they are, just these kind of aggressive bullies wanting to kind of beat people into a different direction. And it was only in the last 15 years, and certainly I've been rescuing dogs for certainly 25 years. And, I didn't join up my love and compassion as far as dogs, a specific animal. I was, as we now call it, a speciesist. I thought I was compassionate because I loved my companion animals. And I didn't actually spread that to all the other animals, all the other amazing species on this planet, and particularly farm animals, because, I was eating them. I used to eat meat. And it's only I stopped eating meat about 11 years ago when I watched a film called Earthlings, which, as you will know, is the most extraordinary documentary on intensive animal agriculture and slaughter. It is so shocking, and so the treatment exposed in that film of animals is so disgusting. I couldn't speak for 3 hours after watching it. And I determined then and there that I would never eat meat again, and I never have, and I never will. So I am, to all intents and purposes, an ethical vegan, I suppose, because I made a very positive, ethical and moral choice, and an emotional one as well. And then it led me through, to use a terrible word, bleed, But then that led me on, because I hadn't thought that, of course, fish suffer the same consequence as farm animals. And the dairy industry is as disgusting as just animal slaughter per se. So once you open that remarkable door that is marked animal rights, animal caring, you are introduced to a world of shocking processes that, just break your heart. So I am thrilled to have reached a point in my life where I truly, I think, understand what the right to life means. And it is so important to me in my life that's why it's changed my life entirely in terms of how I relate to the planet, how I relate to all species, and how I relate to human beings as well. And I believe my compassionate soul has become stronger and broader because of my understanding of intense cruelty.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's really interesting, because that journey you described there is one that many of us have taken. It's been a constant step. I always joke that the reason I went vegetarian was just to upset my mum and dad. It seemed like a really good thing to do at 17 years old. So I've been through punk, and various other things. I tried to grow my hair long, that didn't really work, But then I was like, oh, go vegetarian. Yeah, that'll definitely work, and it did actually. Bless.
Did you do it as a protest then?
So,
did you do it as a protest then?
Yeah.
So it wasn't a
process.
It wasn't a moral. It was a part of growing up.
17, yeah, that's just to piss my mum and dad off, really, Peter. I can't think of a better way to put it, really. It was 1980. I mean, it was a slightly different climate. It was just around when John Lennon died. It was this time 40 years ago. It was pretty much this time. Sort of experimenting with quite a lot of different alternative lifestyle things. And sort of within a year, I was squatting in North London and living a completely alternative lifestyle. So, yeah, it was definitely, it was the whole about no packaging and living out of sacks of lentils and rice, and going to a Whole Food shop and scooping it out and living really what I suppose, more on a kind of zero waste concept. And it was definitely a revolutionary thing. And I'm sure people like Jeremy Corbyn and stuff went vegetarian in 1973, really. So similar sort of thing. It's a bit of a protest, really. It's like, look, I'm an alternative, free-thinking individual. But it's interesting when you look at the history, is that, you could argue that Peter Singer, not Springer, beg your pardon, Peter Singer, who is more of a welfare, he does talk about still that he's not really vegan. He would still consider eating, backyard chicken eggs and mollusks he eats. He doesn't really have a rights perspective. And Tom Reagan kind of got thrown out the window in the 80s. And I think one of the things that happened is we did go to a welfare kind of paradigm, if you like, instead of going to a rights paradigm. And I think we went down a lot of single issue campaigns instead of a vegan. We were very worried about different individual animals, but we weren't campaigning for all animals and about the use standing against the use of all animals. And that was really actually only, I would say, even 20 years ago that it became a necessity to be vegan. That you could campaign for animals and still use animals, and that in some circles veganism was rejected by animal campaigners as being too extreme, and this idea that somehow you had to not use animals was way too much. Whereas going and campaigning, I don't know, to end fox hunting or close down a laboratory or something, I suppose just took less personal commitment, really. I suppose
it's interesting. Pete Singer defines things. He will eat things that don't have, as far as he is considered, a central nervous system. Because he feels he thinks they don't feel anything. I thought he was a sort of a vegan.
Vaguely vegan, yes, veganish.
It's vaguely vegan.
It's pretty much plant-based is what I use to refer. I mean, vegan is an ethical choice. Pretty much plant-based is pretty much anything else that isn't vegan, except
yes, but
lots of animals.
People are tending to choose to use the term plant-based as opposed to vegan now, because lots of people find the term vegan threatening again, like animal rights.
Yes, very similar, isn't it?
So now people get. I mean, what is particularly wonderful now, just picking up on what you were saying, Tim, about caring for all species, is that because of the fantastic, shared communication we get from social media and the amount of it, we do learn on a daily basis how vital and important all species on our planet are in relation to how they contribute to our wonderful planet. So, they all have a role to play, and so they all should have the right to life. And we find ourselves having arguments or conversations about the right to life only focused on intensive breeding processes that, people say, well, what will happen to all these animals if we didn't eat them? Well, of course, we wouldn't breed them. It's a totally false abuse of the natural order of things to have intensive breeding farming factories. One should leave wildlife to deal with itself, and we should help it by not concreting over its habitat. So it is, I'm just, kind of knocking on what you're saying, Tim. It's a huge subject that affects so many layers of our world and the survival of our planet. And we have to respect ants. We have to respect bugs. Certainly, we know we have to respect bees. When they go, we go, as the common phrase is now. So it's a wonderfully exciting subject, I think, and it's so vitally important because it is the future, and it's the future of our children and their grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. And we have to leave the planet hopefully better than we find it at the moment. And I am of that generation, really, on so many levels, that has got so much, has taken the best out of this planet. Yeah. Whether it be, I was born in 1946, so I've never had to do, service in the armed forces. I missed that by a year. So I haven't had to be involved in any kind of great war. Yeah. And I, because intensive animal farming started just after the Second World War as a means of feeding the nation. And then, of course, investors and corporations thought, oh, this is a great way to make money. Let's intensify even more and make our fortunes. So what was seemingly something that was going to save the nation then became a way of entrepreneurs making their fortunes, and it's been abused and exposed. And the one good thing about that is it has told us that we don't need to do it. We can save the planet by stopping it now. But I do, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I feel so passionately about it. Is one, because I abused it for so long myself without thinking, and also because I have had the best that this planet has to offer. And I feel now I would like to correct some of the mistakes that I've made in my life. And I would genuinely and sincerely like to leave a healthier footprint.
I'm at that age, 1963, and I share that, I was lucky to be part of the jet age, like in the 60s. So when I'm one of the first package holidays, anywhere on a Comet jet to
yes.
And I had the best of that. I remember going to Portugal in 1972 as a child, just before the whole tourist boom sort of started, and just building the first kind of little complex in a fishing village. And when I went back there last year, actually, and I went through Faro Airport, and it was almost empty, it was really deserted. And the taxi driver was saying how quiet the whole British trade was now with Brexit uncertainty. So Brits had stopped travelling. And I felt almost like a ghost. And of course, this is before COVID-19. But it felt like it was the end of an era, really. And that, like we'd had our best. We'd had 50 years of flying, and look what it's done. We don't need, and I feel the same with you, a responsibility to grandchildren to do what I can in our short time to try and put to rights some of the things. And I do think that there's some solutions that are really straightforward and simple that we can really push for. And I do believe that we should be trying to inspire each other to be more active and to take our opportunities and to use them and try and really work together more to make a consensus of common sense that we agree on, that says, animals are not ours to use, and we need plant-based diets everywhere. And animals not being ours to use is an individual philosophical position that takes some thought and consideration. And getting food systems and transforming institutions into plant-based diets is just, it's going to be hard work. It's working together to change systems and institutions. That's going to be hard work.
Yes, I think that they should introduce into the school curriculum. I mean, I'm also a patron, and this sounds like it's in contradiction to being a patron for animal aid. I'm also a patron for Compassion in World Farming. And because I believe in intervention, and I believe the work that they are doing is at least trying to show the world that we cannot overpopulate it with intensive animal agriculture. Absolutely. And I think that reading such as Farmageddon and The Dead Zone, both books written by Philip Limbury, should be required reading by everyone who wants to understand what intensive animal agriculture is doing, firstly to the planet because it's destroying it. And in The Dead Zone, he shows you the result of animal agriculture. And he is presently writing a book called 60 Harvests Left. And that's what he predicts it will take, and then the world will be finished. So we've got 60 years to put it right. Now, both of you might still be around then, but I won't be. So I'm going to try my level best to kind of bring as much attention to this problem as I can for whatever time I have left on this wonderful planet. That's, again, is something that drives me. And I think that's why, you touched on it, Jade, and we haven't had time to talk about all these things yet because we've got engaged in a very, very interesting, I hope, conversation just about the subject itself. But one of the reasons that I've become known as the person who can't say no. So I'm now either an ambassador or a patron to about 20 or 25 different charities, all animal related and all our planet related, and all working to try and make our planet healthier. And the thing I learn from every charity that I'm engaged with is the easiest and the quickest way for us to heal our planet is, as Tim says, to be plant-based, is to respect the soil that is feeding us and not destroy it by intensive animal agriculture. What's that knocking up in here? Who's trying to get in there, Tim?
I don't think it's my upstairs neighbour annoyingly.
The Animal Aid do a lot of education work, don't they? It's one of the strong points, one of the, one of the strong points, there are many strong points, but one of the real focuses of Animal Aid is to get into schools and really try and help educate the need for, plant-based diets and also that broader context of being vegan and not using animals. And I found it fascinating, Pete, that you do all these different charities And you have now got, and this is very much, I share this, is that when you have an underpinning understanding of animal rights, it's just basically one right not to be used. The animal has a right to live, basically, not be owned, used, not to be profited from. You understand that, and it's not a complicated principle, really. It's a principle of justice. It's easy to apply in many respects, especially on a basic, straightforward terms of choosing whether to use animal products or not.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important that we have that understanding, but we should also not be shy to engage with other work on a broader spectrum. You mentioned, compassionate world farming. I do think it's important to really engage in the conversations with different groups. And although that common one goal of going vegan is the underpinning factor, and the understanding of the animal rights principle underpins veganism. From that, and with that clarity, you can really engage in a lot of different pains and tactics, and because you've took trouble to get to the sort of core principles of this movement, which after all we've inherited. We've all been, this has been passed on down. When you look at the history of the vegan social movement from the 40s, the foundation of the Vegan Society. And the first 30 years of that, before it sort of became active, Hunt Sabs in 1963, I think, was the first real animal activism as we know it in many respects. The people alive still. Dave Wetton is still with us, I think. Dave,
yes,
Hunt Sabber.
Yes, he is.
These people like Ronnie Lee and Roger Yates, who were founding members of the Animal Liberation Front. I mean, you mentioned about how nice these people are. They're really, really nice people.
Well, I know Dave Wetton, and I think he's a remarkable man. He's about 80 now, I think, and he's still sabbing. He's marvelous.
I know.
And I have a huge amount of respect and support for the Hunt Sabs. I think they've just released this film. I don't know if you've seen it. With Lord Mancroft doing a webinar, chairing a webinar about how hunters can avoid the police detecting them by laying false trails and how to represent yourself with police. It's a masterclass in how to break the law. It's quite shocking. And that has been, and it's a 3-hour webinar, and it has been exposed. In fact, it's on my Facebook page if anyone's interested in having a look at it. And it is shocking, but it's the Hunt Sabs who have exposed that. And again, the Hunt Sabs are looked at in the same light as animal rights people, because they're viewed as being balaclava for louts, whereas in fact they're all the Hunt Sabs I've met are genuine, down-to-earth, compassionate people who, quite rightly, like us, hate animals being chased and ripped apart by other animals while people sit and wait for their stirrup cup on their horses, shouting tally-ho, thinking they're having jolly good fun. It's absolutely disgusting.
Well, we've got Mel Bolton coming on later. Mel was attacked literally last month out sabbing and put in hospital. He's made a very speedy recovery. And Mel's campaigning for animals at some personal cost to himself, indeed. For the last, good 40 years, is another representative of that old school, who I do think have been misunderstood and misrepresented, and possibly even by myself at times. It's taken me a while to really understand that animal rights principle and really relate to, like how people like Barry Horn felt when they were doing what they did and ultimately paying the price with their life.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of animal activists all over the world currently in jail, people who've suffered the most intense injuries, living today still with those some mental scars, and I just think the trauma of knowing how hard it is to do anything about this awful atrocities.
Yes, that's right.
It's a lonely, at times it's a lonely world for the animal rights, ethical vegan, and I think the the advent, groups like Animal Aid and Viva and the Vegan Society that have really flourished, and the events that have really flourished. There's so many vegan events up until this year, and I'm sure there'll be some back. But I think those two areas especially really help build communities and give people a sense of belonging, and that they're not alone. And that if we work together, we can do some incredible things, and there's a number of real achievements in the animal rights history that documented, and indeed some I wouldn't say failures, but I suppose some things that didn't succeed, or could have been done better, or maybe could have succeeded if. So I think there's lessons to learn there. Jade, have you got anything specific about wildlife? Just tying back into the wild. I'm conscious of the time. We've been talking an hour. I know we've got Natalia coming up at 3:30 in half an hour with squirrels, talking in depth at squirrels. Before I have an interesting conversation at 5 o'clock about animal rights and free living beings with a panel. So is there anything on your questions you wanted to ask Peter specifically? Or?
Yeah. We've actually managed to cover most of the things that I had kind of noted down amazingly. So that's fantastic. But one thing we were talking about earlier, Peter, was your work with Animals Asia. So I know today we focused a lot on wildlife in the UK. Could you tell us a bit more about Animals Asia and your support for that organisation?
Animals Asia, I think, is, for me, in terms of the medium to big term charities, is the finest charity on the planet. It was founded by a most inspiring woman called Jill Robinson about 23 years ago. It's based in Hong Kong, and what they do is they rescue moon bears. Moon bears are big brown bears with a golden crescent on their chest, which is why they're called moon bears. They're sun bears as well. They have shorter hair. And this remarkable woman started this charity, and to date they've rescued about 600 bears from biofarms. Bears are kept on biofarms in China and in Vietnam and across Southeast Asia. And they have their bile extracted from their gallbladder daily to be used in Chinese pharma. It's totally unnecessary because the bile can be produced better and more effectively synthetically and more in harmony with Chinese pharma because it's non-invasive. But if you can imagine, as we were talking about mink or any animal, bears in the wild will travel up to 40 or 50 miles a day, and in the biofarm, on the biofarms, they're kept in crush cages, is what they're called, which just enables the bear to turn around. They can't move other than to turn around. Bears can live for up to 30 years. These biofarms were first created legally in the 80s, so there will be hundreds of thousands of bears that have actually lived their entire lives in a cage. And as all of them do, as all animals do that are kept in confined circumstances like that, they go through a period of stereotypic hysterical behavior, and then of course they die. And all of these bears also have serious problems with their liver and with their gallbladder. And I think it's one of the worst animal rights problems on the planet, because this is a form of horror and torture that goes on for 30 years. Trophy hunting is disgusting, but at least the animal dies quickly, or not quickly, but it doesn't take 30 years to kill them. This charity is fantastic. They have 3 sanctuaries, 2 in China and 1 in Vietnam. They've also now got to the point where they have agreed with the government in Vietnam that they will actually stop all biofarming in Vietnam by 2022. So it's a major achievement done by this charity and Jill Robinson, and that will send a message across the whole of Southeast Asia, and I hope will also send a big message to China, because this biofarming has just got to stop. I mean, I was very relieved to see, as a result of the COVID crisis, and they banned the sale and eating of all wildlife in Wuhan, where this virus apparently started. So there are results coming from this disaster that will, I hope, in the future be beneficial to all animals and, of course, then to all mankind, humankind. But Animals Asia is very, very active in Southeast Asia, particularly China. And since they started in 1997, there are now hundreds of indigenous animal welfare organizations and charities within China itself who are absolutely and totally committed to the same kinds of feelings that we all have for animals, which is a great, great step forward and a wonderful representation of the compassionate side of the Chinese nation.
Absolutely.
So I quite agree. I had to echo that sentiment just before we come to that question, just to say how I think important it is to be supportive too of activists in different parts of the world. Part of what we're hoping to do, Peter, actually, is to get some of these subtitled into different languages, Arabic and Chinese, Spanish, and use our contacts within people like Animal Rebellion, who we had a panel with crossing 4 continents our last online event. People joining in from all over the world. So I think we're very lucky in this country to have such a rich history. We've been talking quite a lot about our history today, actually, which is very important, especially people coming into the movement. I know a lot of us tend to have a capacity to sort of reinvent our movements. But I think it's good to honour the movement you join and to seek to understand a bit of the history of the movement before you put your own interpretation on it, which seems to be prevalent these days. But it's very important to be using, I think, what we've learned and try and use that to be supportive for activists all over the world. It's a difficult one because activists all over the world, we've all countries exploit animals appallingly.
Yeah.
And there has been a culture of, especially in this country, where we claim these higher welfare standards and look at other countries and demonise them and how shocking they are for their abhorrent practices without looking as far as literally a few miles down the road where we are mincing, male chicks alive so that we can have eggs for breakfast.
Well,
so
we have far too many.
To have that principle of understanding that, I think, and try and provide, rather than demonising other countries, is to provide support for the activists who are already doing.
I don't think we should. I agree with you entirely. I don't think we should ever demonise other countries. We have far too many vulnerable windows ourselves that people can throw stones at for us to start throwing stones in other directions. So I agree with you entirely about that. I've just seen a question come up. Are we to deal with this question?
Yes, we've got a question, and we've got a couple of questions. We've been going on for an hour, so we've got a couple of comments. We've got a couple of questions. So there's one I know that Carol's asked. So we'll have that back one up about dogs. There you go. So Peter, this one would be for you. You have a dog.
It's about owning pets in general. This, yes. I mean, it's a very interesting thing because I have been criticised for having and rescuing dogs. And there is, I've also been criticized because I believe in intervention, like I believe in having CCTV cameras in all slaughterhouses. I believe in stopping live transport. And similarly, that's a very, very fundamental belief within the vegan movement, that one should wait until Armageddon and then as the evangelicals believe, that when everything collapses, then it will restart with the beliefs of the evangelicals. I believe that veganism as a world movement is not going to happen in my lifetime. So in the meantime, I believe that we need to reduce the horror in the journey. I don't mean that by doing that, one is supporting slaughter, because I want all slaughter to end. But I believe that one can intervene and stop some of the horror before the slaughter, which is why I support charities like Compassion Animal Farming, for instance. Now, in terms of owning pets, or I hesitate to call my dogs pets because they're members of my family, and they have as dominant a position in my family as I do in terms of their rights. My feeling about having pets in one's home or in one's life is dogs have been a part of our evolution. In fact, it has been said by some scientists that were it not for dogs, man would still be a hunter-gatherer, because it was wild dogs that taught early man to hunt. In fact, it has been said that it was wild dogs that stopped early man being herbivores, taught them how to hunt and kill animals, and that's what introduced early man into the carnist life. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm happy to believe that. I think that dogs have chosen us rather than us choosing dogs. And so I'm quite happy to have as many dogs as I can possibly have in my life, because I believe it is a mutually agreed relationship. Even though I don't understand the language of the dog seems to understand my language more than I understand the dog's language. But I do know that from my relationship with all the dogs that I have lived with in the last 30 odd years, they have chosen me, or chosen my wife, or chosen my family to want to be a part of. So I don't impose anything on the animals I have in my life. I try to give them a life. So once they are socialized and don't want to attack anyone, I give them the life they want. So my dogs are not over-disciplined, and I don't, force them to behave in certain ways. I just I persuade them to be social and to be as hygienic as they possibly can. So I have nothing against having a companion animal like a dog, but I do object hugely to having any animal as a pet, exotics, for instance, reptiles or birds or animals that need and should be in the wild. I am completely against. So, but in terms of having a dog or a cat, because they like the relationship that they have, the interdependence that is there with a human, I don't have an objection to that. But anything other than that, I would have a problem with.
Okay, so I'll just add very briefly, because we're nearly out of time. I know we've got one more question. I kind of object to the breeding of domesticated animals. I would say that we really need to put an end to the breeding of domesticated animals. Rescue animals is the solution for now, I would say. But my own opinion is that I'm not that keen to see animals being bred as domesticated animals. But I do realise that it's a contentious issue. And it could be indeed a whole subject for a whole discussion.
Absolutely.
It's a complex issue. Touch on it's a complex relationship, isn't it? With dogs, they have this wonderful relationship with humans. There's a real unconditional love there that I'm aware is very strong. I'm not someone who has dogs and cats or domesticated animals. I never have done, but I do recognise that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out there are so many dogs and cats living in shelters right now that need rescuing and need a home. So, yeah, if anyone does want to have a companion animal, it's so important to rescue and not purchase them from a breeder, someone who's exploiting their companion animal for profit.
Indeed. That refers to Tim's point that you shouldn't breed animals to be for companionship. And of course, there is a big issue, yes, of course. I totally support what you just said, Jade. All of my dogs are rescue dogs, and I encourage everyone to rescue and rather than go to a breeder. I also am part of another campaign that goes down all puppy farms and things like that. So But dogs are extraordinary also because they bring not just unconditional love, but they bring cures and amazing things into our lives that are quite extraordinary, like medical detection dogs and dogs that protect our borders and things like that. It is an interesting, and you're quite right, Tim. It's a whole conversation all of its own to try and to deal with the issue of owning animals or owning pets.
Just on that note, I know that a real big advocate for rescue dogs, is sort of written, and my name is Rescue. So the dog's name, my name is Rescue, is your good pal Ricky Gervais, which brings me to this final question. And we've only got 2 minutes before Jade has to go off and interview Natalia shortly. But is it true, Peter Egan, that you got Ricky Gervais and his wife to do Veganuary this year? Is this a scurrilous rumour, or is this indeed
It might be a scurrilous rumour. I haven't discussed it with him. I mean, both Ricky and Jane are people of their own mind, and they would choose to do something. They wouldn't need encouragement from me to do it. So that's a scurrilous rumour, yeah.
It's a scurrilous rumour, okay.
But I do have such huge admiration for Ricky Gervais and for Jane. They are remarkable people, and I think that Ricky is an absolutely fantastic human being.
Peter, on that note, we're going to say goodbye, just to say that you have actually been, you may have missed this bit of news, but you've been nominated yesterday for a VegFest UK award as inspirational vegan of this year, along with other people, but in particular because I do think you do have a real influence on people of different generations that perhaps, I don't want to sound ageist here, he says sounding ageist, but I think it's true, younger people generally more open to fresh ideas and adopting plant-based diets very rapidly. But our older generation, perhaps more resistant to change or attached to tradition. And I think the work you do that, for certainly older generations especially, is particularly inspiring. But I know also that you inspire a lot of younger activists. And I met one recently who was singing your praises. I think he's only 9 or 10 years old. That's young Hector, who was on a set with you.
Indeed, absolutely.
We had him on a show. He's a young actor, and he was going, "Oh, Peter Egan,
Oh, how wonderful!"
So you're clearly an inspiration across the board.
Well, I'm so delighted to hear that. Thank you so much, Tim. I'm really.
And all I can say is we just hope that this will help inspire you to keep doing the work you're doing. I know you don't need any inspiration because you have that already, but it's always nice to know that people really genuinely do. Appreciate your efforts, and we've seen you stand up for animals in the cold pouring rain outside laboratories in Oxford, right the way through to gala dinners with the wealthy and the famous, and everybody in between. And so, thank you.
Well, that's very kind.
Long may you continue.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Jade. Very nice talking to you.
Yes, and you, and thanks so much for joining us. It was a pleasure.
Great. See you next time.
Yes.
See you shortly. We'll be back soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.